Hi everyone, it is so good to be here with you at Vision Together. It's great to be part of this exciting event and I'm so glad you've all joined together with me here today. My name is Tanya, I'm Australian and that one's complicated. I was living in China, but I had to leave due to the situation with COVID. I'm currently in the US visiting my husband and I'll spend most of this year in Australia while we apply for permission for me to stay here permanently. I've been asked to speak to you today on relationships from my perspective as a cross-cultural consultant, but also as someone who has lived cross-culturally for more than half my life, including several years as an international student myself. A lot of my research and my professional life in general looks into ways we misunderstand each other and how to build bridges of understanding that lead to deeper and more meaningful relationships. I spend a lot of time talking about ways to improve cross-cultural communication, build stronger relationships across differing cultures, even when that happens within a family, and create understanding that opens the door to true connection. But, and let's be honest here, why should you care? What does any of this have to do with you, the situations you're in, the problems you're facing, and the questions that you're asking? The second reason I was asked to speak to you was my personal experience as an international student, of starting a new life in a new place, building new relationships in new ways, then moving to another country and starting all over again. I have done that 3 times as a student on 3 different continents in 3 differently cross-cultural environments. I've spent almost my entire adult life outside my passport country and my closest friends come from various countries. I'm married to someone who doesn't share my nationality, my accent, or my cultural upbringing, and I was even the only Australian in my own wedding party. So cross-cultural connection is not only my profession, it's also deeply personal for me. And I know that cross-cultural connection forms a huge part of each of your lives as well. When we learn tools for connection across cultures, we open doors to more possibilities, more potential friendships, relationships, communities, more connections. We develop the potential to take those relationships deeper, to understand each other better, to create closer connections. My goal today is to pose some questions for us all to consider and suggest some small steps we can all try out, ways for us to develop more and deeper relationships in our lives. Later, you'll have time to think about this together in family groups and on your own, and then I'll be back tomorrow for some live Q&A. So let's start by defining relationships. A relationship is a connection between 2 entities. Not necessarily 2 people, although that's what we're talking about today. But I also love talking about the relationships we have with places and languages. We have emotional connections to far more than other people, but we don't have that long, so let's talk about people. A good relationship is an emotionally healthy connection with mutual benefit. Both people gain something from the connection, even though they may gain very different things. There are often power imbalances in relationships where one has physical, emotional, spiritual, financial, or social power over the other. In a healthy relationship, that power is never used to coerce the other, to make them behave or make them feel ashamed or guilty or do anything that makes them uncomfortable. This is true for family relationships, friendships, and romantic relationships. But our world is not perfect. We are all unhealthy in many ways, and so we have all experienced and perpetrated unhealthy patterns in all our relationships. I'm sure you can think of times that you have made mistakes in your friendships and other relationships, and times where people in your life have failed you. Those mistakes and those hurts can make it harder to trust others and entrust ourselves to them. But as we take time today to think, to imagine, to dream, let us picture healthy relationships, emotionally healthy and mutually beneficial connections between people where each one gives and receives from the other without guilt or shame or demands, where we acknowledge our mistakes, apologize sincerely for the hurt we cause, and try our best to improve. The next layer to add to this lovely dream of ours is that of cross-cultural connections, relationships between people who have different backgrounds to each other, who experience the world differently to each other. But let's wait again. Don't we all have different backgrounds, no matter where we grew up? Don't we all experience the world differently? Well, yeah, that's exactly right. Every person in the world is unique. No 2 people have the exact same set of experiences, not even identical twins growing up in the same home. And yet there are people we understand more easily, more readily, more quickly, because we do have more shared experiences with them. Someone who grew up in the same country, the same town, went to the same school, had the same teachers, knows the same people, there are things I won't have to explain to them because we share that knowledge. When I tell them a story about myself, it will contain a lot of familiar information. The only details they will have to absorb are the ones that are particular to me, the ways in which we are different. In this way, we get to know each other quite quickly. But the less shared knowledge we have, the fewer shared experiences we have, the more there is to learn, and the slower the process of self-revelation moves. This is why it helps to discuss ways of connecting cross-culturally. It's all about building bridges of connection even when we come from different places around the world and different places in life. Because slower paced connections do not equal impossible relationships. And similarity is not necessary for a great friendship. My best friend and I are a great example of this. We are very, very different people, and we've only lived in the same country for 2 years of the 15 that we've been friends. We often joke that we're only friends through the grace of God and a sense of humour, and probably God's sense of humour more than ours. She's American, I'm Australian. Her mother and father's parents immigrated to Australia. My family have lived in Australia for generations. My husband is American, her husband is Nigerian. We met and lived in China, they met and live in Cambodia. We had totally different childhoods, totally different experiences of family, education and work, and our personalities are so very different. She makes me so frustrated and I make her cry. We love each other though, we support each other, and when we hurt each other's feelings, which happens a lot, we tell each other. She cries and we work through it. My relationship with her has been one of the most beneficial in my whole life, and it's actually our differences that have made it so beneficial, even though they're also what make it so bumpy. I've learned so much from her and become a much better person by learning from the ways she does things differently than I naturally do. And she's benefited from my perspective too, and the ways in which I see the world differently than she does. See, that's the challenge in all of this. The more similar we are, the more easily we understand each other, and the more naturally we can become friends, and the less effort it requires. But the more different we are, the more there is to learn, and the better we can become. And yet it's hard. It is hard work to build deep connections with people who are really different to me. It takes a lot of time and energy. And no matter how committed I am to putting in the time and making it work, I can't make the other person choose to do that as well. Have you had that experience of working hard to get to know someone only to realize they aren't that interested in getting to know you? So what do you do when, as an international student, you look around and see that so many of the people you live and study and work with have far more things in common with each other than they do with you? When you know it takes you so much work to understand them and to make yourself understood by them. There's a few different ways we tend to deal with this. One, making ourselves less. We hide the parts of ourselves that don't seem to fit, and we create a new self that matches the expectations that others seem to have of us. Two, refusing to change. We go in the opposite direction and we push back. We refuse to change who we are to make someone else happy. If they don't like me as I am, why should I put in the effort to try to befriend them? So I look for people who have a similar background to me, and I stick with them and only them. Or three, retreating into silence. This is when we choose not to engage much, but we watch and we listen. We try to learn, but from the outside, never attempting to find a way in. We try to please people without actually engaging with them. No matter how we choose to deal, it can be tiring. It is tiring to not be your whole self, especially when doing it in an additional language, one that doesn't express all of who you are or in which you feel limited. Perhaps you don't feel as articulate and it discourages you from speaking up. Perhaps you worry you'll say the wrong thing and people will laugh at you, or worse, laugh behind your back, so you'll keep unknowingly making the same mistake. And the work of listening carefully to others talking quickly in their own language can tire you out. Connection is tiring work, but disconnection is a tiring life. It's tiring to feel disconnected, especially in the place where you live, where the disconnection happens because you take a step back, or because you feel no one will take a step toward you, or both. It can be quite a weight to carry. It can make you feel you have to do everything on your own. And that's an isolating feeling, especially when you're in a place where you don't have a strong network of family and friends to support you and teach you how things work. And yet, there is something positive in each of these approaches that we have. If we can balance these natural tendencies rather than practicing them to extremes, they can actually help us in the quest to develop stronger cross-cultural connections. So number one, we can invite others in. The goal in building a relationship is to build a real connection between you and another person. And that's impossible to achieve if you're creating a false sense to interact with them, which is why hiding ourselves doesn't work. We know that no matter how friendly and caring they become towards us, it only touches this mask that we've created and not the true person underneath. But what if we use our observations of others' expectations to plan some easier access pathways, ways to help people get to know us? We can create some smaller steps that start that process. 2, we can engage with others. There is definitely value in refusing to change yourself to make someone else happy. Yes, be yourself. But we also want to give grace to those who are willing to try even when they get it wrong. There is value in finding people who have a similar background to me. That bond and that immediate understanding is so comforting. It is really helpful for international students to connect with others from similar backgrounds. But rather than making this your only point of connection, think of this as the refueling that enables you to spend energy investing in other relationships that might be more energy intensive. And 3, we need to put knowledge into practice. Those skills of watching and listening and learning are wonderful, but we need to take what we learn and put it into practice. We need to be willing to ask questions, to make mistakes, to try and fail and try again. We have to look for ways in, knock on doors, say yes to invitations, see what fits while feeling free to say no to what doesn't. The next thing to keep in mind is that similarity doesn't just come with sharing a passport, an ethnicity, or a religion. Sometimes you click with another person because of shared interests. You like the same books or movies or sports. You both enjoy the same music, hobby, or activity. Sometimes you click because you think the same way, even though on the surface you don't seem to have too much in common. Sometimes, despite childhoods that look completely different on the outside, you find similarities nonetheless. You're both the youngest sibling, you both have a favourite uncle you spend a lot of time with, you both loved cooking with your grandmother. There are also more painful overlaps. An illness or tragedy that connects you, something that is hard to understand unless you've been through it yourself. So that's a few ideas and things to think about, but what next? What do we do with this? My advice to you is to construct mini steps out of small similarities. Try looking for a small similarity overlap between you and another person, like a shared interest or a shared experience, and turn that into a mini step. Turn it from something you notice to something you say to something they now know you both share. Instead of trying to tell longer stories that are full of details that highlight your differences, focus on the overlaps. That builds a connection much faster, and once you're more invested in each other, you'll want to go back and learn the rest of the stories. It's a case of working smarter, not harder. Also, spread your energy around and connect with multiple people. If you find that small steps don't start adding up to greater connection and understanding with one particular person, then focus your energy on someone who is interested. So here's an example of small stepping. If someone I would like to build a better connection with mentions they play the flute, or used to, I might say, "Oh wow, me too. What sort of music did you like playing?" This lets them know that we have something in common and encourages them to speak more about it to help me find out if we have any more overlaps in this area. I'll listen to see if we played similar instruments, didn't like practicing scales, learned to improvise, played in a band or an orchestra, other ways that we can add a mini step to the conversation. What I will not do is add details about my flute playing experiences I know will not resonate with them. For example, I won't mention losing weeks of practice time during international moves or changing teachers every time my family moved, unless it will provide a connection to one of their experiences. And I only mention marching band to Americans. In my research, I've interviewed hundreds of people who have lived cross-culturally, and I've heard many examples of ways that they've used mini steps in building connections. Sport is a really big one. Joining a team which gives you built-in time together and builds shared experiences, or any kind of club or association that meets regularly, like martial arts, a chess club, or a knitting and crochet group. If you have visible equipment that demonstrates your interests, like a camera, a tennis racket, a violin case, then others can see you and you can see them. The same is true for clothing or stickers that mark your favourite interests. I have a t-shirt with a design from my favourite sci-fi TV show. It's a bit cryptic if you don't watch the show, but if you do, you immediately know what it means. And wearing that shirt around campus was the fastest way to find my fellow geeks. Volunteering can also help. You find yourself alongside others who care about the same cause you do. And I've also heard over and over and over how being part of a welcoming church or a Bible study group helped people build genuine connections in a new place with that shared interest. I want to finish by telling you a story of how powerful small steps toward cross-cultural connection can be. One night, when I was a student in Beijing, I left the Congolese embassy with 3 friends after a long night of dancing at a wedding reception, and we got in a cab to go home. My good friend Uche was in the front, and I was in the back with Michelle and Jean-Baptiste. The two of them are both francophone, French-speaking. She's from Burundi, he's from the Central African Republic, and they both spoke only a little English, and I spoke even less French, and we were all still learning Chinese. But that didn't stop us from being friends. Shortly after arriving in Beijing, I had decided that I would say yes to any invitation, no matter how big or small, whether it sounded like something I'd enjoy or not, even if I was tired or anxious. That decision led me to try lots of new things I wouldn't have otherwise, spend time with people who were very different to me, and build lots of connections through lots of small steps. I spent months hanging out in groups of students where I was often the only Australian, sometimes the only non-Asian or non-African. I often went out of my comfort zone, choosing to join activities or eat food that really weren't my favourites so that I could deepen the connections I was building. I saw the same group of people at least twice a week at Bible study and church, plus larger student events. And the only reason I was in that cab that night was because I'd stayed late dancing with a large group of African students, including the groom, who had slowly become my good friends over months and months of these small steps. The wedding started out as a very international event with people from many countries in attendance, but as others slowly left, I stayed with the friends who had determined to teach this rhythmless white girl to dance properly until I was the only non-African in the room, dancing the night away with my friends. And I left that night with so many great memories, but that's not why it's such an important story. In the cab that night, Michelle and Jean-Baptiste spent the whole way home teaching me to sing French songs with them. We all love music, and it was one of the ways we connected despite our language barriers. We arrived at Uche's university first, and he handed us some money for cab fare, and we kept going. And distracted by our singing, it was only later we realised he'd given us enough money to cover the cost of the entire journey. A few days later at Bible study, I, in true Australian fashion, was trying to tease Uche about being so sneaky and paying for the whole cab for us all. And I say I tried to, because while the Nigerian man I now call Gogo, which is the Chinese word for big brother, can definitely tease right back, this time he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he was calm and gentle as he firmly explained his choice to be generous, and in a roundabout way suggested that a better response from me would be to humbly accept a kindly meant gift, and to question why I couldn't do that. He spoke gently, but it was a correction, and for the first time I consciously examined this cultural bias I had, that my initial reaction was to tease someone in place of thanking them. And while that might be culturally acceptable and even normal in Australia, that didn't mean it was the only way or the best way. And that was a small step I took in a journey of choosing to live by values like kindness, rather than what any particular country said I should do. Of choosing to demonstrate values in ways others will understand, even when it isn't the most natural way for me to express them. Now, I still get this wrong way too often. It's a journey I'm still on and probably will be my whole life. But it's important to me, and it's a journey I'm thankful for. And it's a journey I couldn't walk without people in my life who come from different places around the globe and in life who have joined me in building connections that bridge our differences. So what about you? Are you willing to put some creative work into building and strengthening cross-cultural connections in your life? Are you willing to go out of your comfort zone to try something new so you can create some shared experiences with people you want to build better connections with? What are some interests or hobbies or experiences you might already share with others that could become these mini steps? So what can you do from here to strengthen connections you have with people both inside and outside the Bridges community? Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this and the stories, and I hope that this got you thinking, that you have some great discussions around these ideas. Enjoy the rest of Vision Together, and I will see you at the Q&A session tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.